What if every pandemic you've ever heard of, every plague, every outbreak, every global health emergency, made a few families richer than ever before? What if sickness was never just a tragedy, but also a business model? Every time the world shut down, markets collapsed and people lined up for survival. There were families sitting in boardrooms, moving billions, predicting every fall, buying every dip, and owning every recovery. They didn't wait for the world to heal, they profited while it bled. This is not a conspiracy theory, this is a pattern, one that's been repeating for centuries. Go back to the 1800s when Europe was fighting cholera and wars at the same time. One banking family quietly financed both sides and doubled its fortune. Move forward to the early 1900s, when oil became the new gold. Another American dynasty built an empire so powerful, it reshaped global medicine and finance at the same time. Fast forward again to Wall Street crashes, to world wars, to modern pandemics, and you'll find the same surnames appearing again and again in every era where chaos meant opportunity. These families don't just survive history, they own it. In this story, we're not talking about governments or politicians. We're talking about the real architects of crisis, the ones who found ways to turn death into dividends. From the Rothschilds' financial chessboard in Europe, to the Rockefellers' oil-fueled empire, from J.P. Morgan's iron grip on Wall Street to DuPont's chemical kingdom, and all the way to the royal vaults of the British Crown, 5 families who didn't just witness pandemics, they capitalized on them. They made the system that the rest of us suffer through. And every time history repeated itself, their profits did too, because pandemics don't just test humanity's strength, they expose who truly owns the cure. Every pandemic begins with panic, but panic is predictable. When fear strikes, liquidity dries up, and the families who control credit decide who survives. The Rothschilds learned that lesson before anyone else. Mayer Amschel. Rothschild started in Frankfurt with nothing more than a coin exchange, but his vision was continental. He sent his sons across Europe to London, Paris, Vienna, Naples. Each branch worked like an organ in one financial body. When a nation fell ill, the family lent to governments desperate for medicine, soldiers, or reconstruction. Interest turned disease into revenue. During the Napoleonic Wars and later cholera epidemics, Rothschild bonds financed recovery. The more devastation, the greater the demand for loans. They built a network of couriers, coded letters, and secret information flows. When markets crashed, they already knew before the public did. Information was power, and in the 19th century it was their private vaccine against loss. When London trembled at rumors of defeat, Nathan Rothschild bought the panic, purchasing British consols at rock-bottom prices, a move that multiplied the family's wealth for generations. When the Spanish flu arrived a century later, their banks were already embedded in the governments managing reconstruction. While nations borrowed to heal, the Rothschilds collected interest. They didn't sell cures, they financed the laboratories that made them. Across the Atlantic, another dynasty was learning that monopoly could outlive mortality. John D. Rockefeller turned oil into civilization's bloodstream. Standard Oil was not merely a company, it was an empire, disguised as infrastructure. As epidemics swept through industrial America, Rockefeller's refineries never stopped. Factories needed light, hospitals needed power, transportation needed fuel. While the public feared contagion, Standard Oil quietly absorbed competitors, buying them out one by one until the entire industry bent to his will. When the Supreme Court finally split the company, each piece became a giant of its own: Exxon, Chevron, Mobil, ensuring that even defeat was profitable. But Rockefeller's most strategic move was into medicine. The Rockefeller Foundation funded vaccine research, epidemiology schools, and global health programs. Charity on the surface, control underneath. By shaping public health policy, they shaped the flow of future profits. Oil powered the economy. Medicine powered the narrative. When crises struck, Rockefeller wealth stood at both ends of the equation, fuel for recovery and funding for the cure. They turned philanthropy into an economic engine, and the world applauded while they consolidated. And while Rockefeller refined energy, J.P. Morgan refined credit. He was the man who saved America from itself, but every rescue came with ownership. The Panic of 1907 was his masterpiece. Banks collapsed, fear spread, and Morgan stepped in orchestrating a private bailout using his own money. The newspapers called him a hero. What they didn't see was how the crisis gave him leverage to shape the Federal Reserve, embedding his influence permanently in U.S. finance. During World War I, Morgan financed the Allies, profiting from both the war and the Reconstruction that followed. When influenza struck in 1918, industries faltered, but Morgan banks handled the debt of governments racing to rebuild. Each disaster increased the dependency on his network. The family name became a synonym for stability, but stability meant dominance. When markets fell, they bought railroads, steel companies, and shipping lines for pennies. Every crash was a clearance sale for the Morgans. Decades later, the same institution, J.P. Morgan Chase, would report record profits during modern pandemics, proving that the legacy had never died, it had just become a logo. Meanwhile, the DuPonts were crafting a different kind of immortality, one made of chemicals. Beginning with gunpowder, they armed wars that reshaped continents. When peace returned, they turned their knowledge toward industry, paints, plastics, explosives, disinfectants. Every crisis produced a new invention, every invention a new dependency. During wartime, they sold weapons. During pandemics, they sold protection. Their laboratories developed materials that became household essentials: nylon stockings, Teflon coatings, Kevlar armor. When the world demanded safety, DuPont supplied it at a premium. Their factories became fortresses of production. Their scientists became soldiers of industry. By the 20th century, they were not just a company, but a cornerstone of American life. Crisis simply accelerated innovation, and innovation ensured dominance. And then there was the British royal family, whose wealth was older than capitalism itself. The House of Windsor inherited not just palaces, but an empire wired for extraction. Colonial expansion turned disease into justification. When plague or famine struck a colony, London imposed new laws, new taxes, new control. Gold, tea, diamonds, cotton, and later oil flowed to the imperial treasury. The health of subjects was secondary to the wealth of the crown. Even as the empire dissolved, its money did not. It moved into trusts, estates, and global investments. The Crown ES portfolio stretched from African mines to Hong Kong real estate to offshore accounts in the Caribbean. Pandemics that crippled economies barely touched royal finances. The family's influence in banking and diplomacy shielded its assets. The monarchy may have evolved into ceremony, but its wealth remained an active participant in the global market. The empire never truly ended. It diversified. Across these centuries, the mechanism remained unchanged. Crisis lowers prices, liquidity disappears, governments borrow, and the few with cash decide the terms of recovery. Pandemics are only one version of the cycle. Wars, crashes, and recessions follow the same rhythm. The names at the top remain familiar because the systems beneath them never changed. When history turns the page, the handwriting stays the same. Each generation inherits not only wealth, but instruction, a playbook on how to move before the world panics. That is why transitions between centuries feel seamless for these families. The Rothschild descendants moved from gold to global bonds, quietly financing institutions like the World Bank and IMF through intermediaries. The Rockefellers evolved from oil to finance to data, investing in biotechnology and digital infrastructure. The Morgans merged into corporate banks that handled trillions in transactions. DuPont's chemical empire fused with Dow, expanding into agriculture and pharmaceuticals. The Windsors repositioned royal holdings into global trusts, managed by private advisors. From plagues to pandemics, from analog to algorithm, their influence adapted faster than any virus could mutate. When COVID-19 arrived, the pattern repeated with surgical precision. Markets crashed, governments borrowed, central banks printed. Asset prices rebounded faster than employment. Billionaire wealth soared. The mechanisms designed over centuries performed flawlessly: bonds, bailouts, and buybacks, modern words for ancient strategies. While billions feared infection, capital migrated upward. The descendants of those same dynasties, whether by blood or by ideology, sat in the boardrooms of hedge funds, pharmaceutical corporations, and global banks. The surnames had multiplied, but the DNA of power was intact. The pandemic era revealed something deeper. Wealth is not destroyed by crisis. It is redistributed. Every closed business became a future acquisition. Every bailout became a transfer from taxpayer to shareholder. Technology companies replaced oil barons as the new monopolists, but the philosophy was the same: control essentials, control the recovery. The playbook never changed, only the products. In the 19th century, it was coal and steel. In the 20th, oil and medicine. In the 21st, data and drugs. The rhythm of exploitation remained identical. Look at the numbers. During global lockdowns, small businesses vanished, but stock markets hit record highs. Central bank liquidity flooded financial assets, benefiting those who already owned them. Wealth concentration reached levels unseen in modern history. The families who had once traded gold now traded algorithms. They funded vaccine research through their foundations and reaped returns through their investments. The illusion of altruism cloaked the machinery of profit. It was Rockefeller logic with a digital face. And while the public argued over masks and mandates, capital quietly consolidated. Real estate funds bought foreclosed properties. Investment firms acquired bankrupt companies. Pharmaceutical giants merged into even larger entities. In every metric, crisis-fed consolidation. Governments called it recovery. Economists called it stimulus. History will call it the same old pattern. What connects the Rothschild banker of the 18th century to the hedge fund manager of today is not blood but blueprint. Information, timing, and control. They act when others freeze, they buy when others sell, and they lend when others beg. That discipline has turned centuries of chaos into continuity. The tragedy is that the mechanism requires suffering to function. Without collapse, there is no cheap asset to buy. Without fear, there is no rush for safety. And yet, humanity keeps offering those conditions. Each pandemic exposes how fragile equality truly is. Health may be universal, but recovery is always selective. As vaccines rolled out and economies reopened, history congratulated itself on resilience. But in boardrooms and investment reports, the conversation was different. Never waste a crisis. The phrase wasn't cynical, it was operational. Every disruption is a doorway, and those who built the system already stand at its threshold. Maybe that is why the cycle feels eternal. The same empires that profited from colonial trade now profit from global finance. The same mindset that extracted labor now extracts data. The same logic that monetized war now monetizes wellness. Power evolves, but its purpose doesn't. And when the next outbreak arrives, and it will, the machinery will start again. Media will amplify fear, markets will collapse, governments will borrow, central banks will print, the wealthy will lend. Then, quietly, ownership will shift. By the time the world heals, it will belong a little more to the same few. It is tempting to believe this can be stopped, but the system is self-healing for those who own it. Attempts at reform often create new opportunities for arbitrage. Regulation consolidates markets further. The very act of saving the economy becomes another profit cycle. So what can change? Awareness, perhaps. Understanding that pandemics are not only biological events, but financial resets. That every crisis leaves footprints leading back to old money. That when we say the economy is recovering, we must ask, for whom? Because the story of these 5 families is not ancient history. It is a mirror. In their reflection, we see the same instincts alive in modern corporations, sovereign funds, and billionaires who treat instability as inventory. The surnames may fade, but the structure endures. When you follow the trail of profit through centuries of disease, you find the same conclusion waiting. Pandemics end, the pattern doesn't. The real contagion is the transfer of power disguised as recovery. And somewhere in a quiet office filled with numbers and forecasts, someone is already preparing for the next one. They will not wear a crown or a top hat. They will wear a suit, hold a tablet, and call it strategy. But the goal will be the same, to buy the world while it sleeps, because every time fear spreads, fortune follows. Every time humanity trembles, history invests. And when the final graph is drawn, it will show the same upward line, the same consolidation, the same conclusion. Pandemics end. Empires fall, markets heal. But wealth, real wealth, never dies. It just changes its family name.